and it was not uncommon for riots to break out because people's fear of machines replacing them.
Luddites!
Sound familiar? sound familiar?
Luddites get such a bad name. They weren't anti-technology. They were anti being treated as disposable.
Come with me. You could come with me. Oh, you're such a sweet little misfit. When your smile falls down, I wanna lift it. Wanna make you better. Wanna run away together.
Okay, hi, and welcome to D-Listers of History, a podcast and now YouTube channel about people you've never heard of who have changed the world. My name is Fega, and I am a public historian and tour guide here in Philadelphia.
My name is Mazal, and I am a mixed media fiber artist. And I'm also Fega's wife.
Yeah, we got a whole family thing going on here. We got 3 cats outside this door.
Begging to get let in.
Yeah, they're pretty sure we're conspiring against them in here. We might hear them later. We'll see. We'll see how desperate they get. So, this episode's been a long time coming. We're all glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, I was not feeling great for a while there, but I'm doing a lot better now.
You know, breathing's overrated. But we ended up with this topic because you've been on a little bit of a hyperfixation.
I've been going down a rabbit hole for the past, what is it, mid-June?
Something like that.
So 2.5 months or so. Yeah, about 2.5 months I've been going down this hyperfixation rabbit hole of sewing machines. I started April with 0 sewing machines. And now I have too many.
We live in this little row home. And there's like 5 sewing machines upstairs, none of which, by the way, work at the moment.
There's more than 5, I think.
One of them I actually drove all the way to Connecticut and back in one day.
6 sewing machines
to retrieve. So I was close. So we have a sewing machine problem.
One of them is like complete trash, but
yeah, it was free. And I didn't have to drive to Connecticut for that one. It's drive a few blocks. So, so I thought sewing machine, I just know from being a historian the importance of the Industrial Revolution and textiles in the Industrial Revolution, especially the first Industrial Revolution. And so I thought, oh, sewing machines, there's surely somebody who invented the sewing machine.
Well, there's too many people who invented a sewing machine.
It turns out it's really complicated. So I guess take it away. I'm not used to like being the other person, so I'll shut up.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who invented sewing machines. A lot of them did not work, and a lot of them did. And a lot of people say they invented sewing machines, but they just stole patents. Yeah, there is a lot of drama in sewing machine world. To this day, actually, I'm in some Facebook groups that are some real drama. One is like says the name of the group, and then at the end of the name of the group in parentheses, it's like, for people with real skills. It's like, okay, you don't want beginners here. Got it.
I like the one, I personally, my favorite group is whichever one you like joined, and then the admin sent you a message to make sure you understood that you could like be in the group without, was it a singer of some specific type of sewing machine?
It was only singers, only before 1900, but it didn't specify before 1900 before you joined the group. It just said like antique or something like that. And I'm like, oh, my sewing machine is from like 1924. Great. That's antique to me. 100 years old is antique. And I got a message that was like, by the way, just so you know,
you're not allowed to talk.
You're not allowed to talk here. You can join, but you only with the understanding that you don't post anything and you don't comment because you said your sewing machine is not from before 1900. And also, it is not a singer. Granted, the name of the group said nothing about it being about singers, but that's okay.
But these groups have been invaluable to you with this research.
So invaluable. There's so many groups that I they're the drama groups, but there's also really, really amazing resource groups that are not gatekeeping like that. And they've been really invaluable posting. I mean, there's old manuals, which is incredible. Finding manuals from, there's one group I have that I'm in that it has literally like 1,000 different sewing machine manuals going back 100 years, more than that, 150 years, whatever. And but there's also these old books that talk about, some are about sewing machine, like servicing sewing machines. Some are about the history, some just smush them all together.
And they basically only exist in like the notes of some of these groups.
Yeah, like if you just Google these resources, you can't find them unless you're in these groups.
Like it's like Martha found the book when her grandmother died and paid someone to digitize it because she's an angel.
Yep.
And put it in this Facebook group because she's not sure what you do with a digitized book once it's digitized. Our cats have decided they need to play right next to the door.
I'm not sure they're playing or trying to break in.
They're playing with something. Or wrestling. But so if you can hear that, sorry.
Anyway, there's a lot of people who purport to have created the first sewing machine. There's some loud noises. Sorry if you can hear that. But one of these people, the person that I am going to be talking about today is the person who I personally think has the best claim to fame here with creating, and the wording is precise here for a reason, the first practical sewing machine. Not the first sewing machine, the first practical one. The first one that actually works, that you can actually do things with.
Seems like an important piece of an invention.
Yeah.
Like it working.
Yeah. And I also say the first practical sewing machine, not the first lock stitch sewing machine. Lock stitch, when you think of sewing machine stitches, the stitches are different than if you're just hand stitching. I should have brought something to demonstrate, but I did not.
Well, we can have some fly-ins.
Yeah. So when you are stitching by hand, you have a needle that goes in and out of the fabric. It has a point on one side and an eye on the other side. The eye is the hole that the thread goes through.
In case you've never seen a needle.
People don't necessarily know what the eye of a needle is. Yeah. But like in any case, it goes all the way through the fabric. And that is really hard to do in a sewing machine. So a lot of people for a long time, were trying to make sewing machines that emulated hand stitching and that needle going all the way through the fabric. And that is just in a short length of thread. And that is just like really, really difficult to do. And so that's not practical. When you think of a modern sewing machine, the type of stitch where it looks the same on both sides is called a lock stitch. They're actually two separate threads that sort of intertwine with each other between each stitch, locking them. It's called the lock stitch. So the lock stitch machine came a bit later than Barthélemy Timonier, who I'm going to be talking about today. That came a bit later than Timonier's machine. And I'm not really going to be talking about that. I'm going to be providing some resources. There's some really great videos that talk about that, but that is not going to be in here because there's just way too much to get through, honestly. So Timonier created a different type of sewing machine, and I am going to tell you about it. So Timonier's father was a dyer, like dyeing clothes, and I'm so sorry, I'm going to mispronounce so many things.
You're already doing better than I ever have in a French episode.
I asked some friends who speak French to please send me voice clips of how to pronounce words and names. But
I just go for it.
But I'm still going to be messing up a lot, I'm sure. So Timonier's father was a dyer from Lyon.
Yeah, no, that one I know.
Lyon. But he moved in 1793 with his wife to, God, Le Arbres.
Someplace else. In
I
France?
did look this one up, but it was like a week ago and I forgot. L'Arbres, something, I don't know. Which is a commune in the Rhone department of France. Department is sort of like
the Rhone Valley?
a province or a state. Department is like
right, but is it the Rhone Valley? Is that the same place? Or
I mean, that's probably where the Rhone department is. Just if I were to take a guess, but this is like a political like designation, like we live in Pennsylvania, except
it's a state.
Yeah,
or in
sort
Canada, they have provinces.
In France, a state is like the next one down. So I think I don't know. I don't really entirely get it. It doesn't matter. It's a commune in the Rhone department of France, and they moved due to the Revolution. First French
like the Marie Antoinette.
Yeah, the big
one.
The first big one. This is like
there's a lot of big ones. France is really good on revolutions.
A recurring theme in Timonier's life is a revolution happened and everything broke down. So Timonier, so they moved in 1793. Timonier was born there in that same year, August 19th of 1793.
So he was born at the beginning of the French Revolution.
So the French Revolution started, I think, in 1792.
Right.
Ended in 1792, or it started, I don't know. Something.
But he was born in the 1790s.
He was born in 1793.
Okay.
Like a few months after his family moved.
Okay.
To this place because of the revolution.
Yeah.
When Timonier was 2 years old, so I guess 75, his family moved to, and I did look this one up, Amplepuis. That one's going to come up a few times, so I looked it up. He was the oldest of 7 children, which is so many children. In his youth, he briefly attended the seminary of Saint Jean, but he soon had to leave for financial reasons. His family had a lot of financial issues. That is a theme that followed Timonier through his whole life. Anyway, Timonier pivoted after he had to leave the seminary, and he became a tailor. By 1813, he was fairly well established in his own shop.
I don't know why that surprised me. Like, I sit here and I was like, oh, a tailor. You can tell my brain's on.
Timonier married Jean-Marie Bonacieux. I don't know. We'll put in a little fly-in that spells it.
Yeah.
Who was an embroiderer in January of 1822. In either 1823 or 1825, depending on the source. Different sources said different things. He settled in a suburb of Saint-Étienne and worked as a tailor there. Timonier and Jean had 3 children within a few years, but she unfortunately passed away pretty soon after they got married, potentially during childbirth. It was very, one source said potentially during childbirth. They didn't want to commit. They said potentially.
I mean, I feel like that's a pretty decent, like, if you don't know how a woman died in those days, that's a pretty decent guess.
And I couldn't find any more sources that were in English that talked about her. I did a lot of translating things from French, but there's only so much translating French books that I can do with like Google Translate. After Jean died, however you say her name, died, Timonier was forced to bring his children back to Amplepuis to be cared for by his mother, while he traveled around working as a tailor for, as one source put it, neighborhood dignitaries. Whatever that means, just like rich people in the neighborhood, I guess.
Yeah, this traveling tailor is a thing that I didn't realize existed until we did the episode with Labor John It's actually a Labor John episode. It's not one of ours, but it's on this. I can't remember her name, but actually she's French. This anarchist who her father was like a traveling tailor.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize that was a job.
Yeah, so apparently if you traveled, you could earn a little bit more money than
Yeah.
if you stayed still, because you could just find all the rich people and just go from rich people to rich people. So he traveled around for a little bit so he could earn money to send back home to his mother and children and presumably his father, but the source didn't mention his father, so his father might not have been alive. It's unclear. At some point, it seems he visited some various embroidery factories in Tarare, Tarare, which is a commune in the Lyonnais Mountains in Rhône. And so he went to this commune in the Lyonnais Mountains in Rhône, which the Lyonnais Mountains, from what I understand, had a whole bunch of just garment manufacturing things. And he got an idea for a mechanical device that could embroider and sew clothes at a much faster rate than humans can sew. So we need to go back in time here to explore a little bit of the very dramatic history of the sewing machine. I am not going to be talking again about what happened after Timonier made his first version of a sewing machine, but the getting up to that point is important for figuring out where his mind was. So humans have been sewing for at least 50,000 years.
I'm gonna make fun of you for a second. This reminds me of I don't know if he's still there, but there's a ranger at Independence National Historic Park who dresses up in like 18th century garb. And I made the mistake of bringing a student group into the space that he was in. And he asked them if they knew about Quakers, and they didn't, because people who aren't from Philadelphia or the surrounding area don't usually know a lot about Quakers. And he says, well, we need to start with Martin Luther hanging his 95 Theses on the door of the church at Burns. And I'm like, sir, they are 12.
He's not entirely wrong.
He's not wrong, but like, look at your audience. So I'm just reminded of that when you're like, so humans have been sewing since
this is a thing
time immemorial.
This is a thing Fago makes fun of me for frequently, which is I'll be like, so just as a little bit of backstory, and I'll go back way too far, but I'm not going back way too far. I promise. So humans have been sewing for at least 50,000 years, and when I say humans, I mean humans, not Homo sapiens, which is an important distinction.
Okay.
Humans meaning like all of the like Homo whatevers.
Okay. So not just Homo sapiens, like Homo erectus. And,
yes.
Okay.
So the way we know this is that the oldest positively identified needle ever found was discovered in 2016 in a cave in Siberia, well, what is today Siberia, that was actually inhabited at the time. This cave has been inhabited for like 250,000 years by many different groups of Homo whatevers. But at this point...
Happy Pride, by the way.
But at this point in time, it was inhabited by the Denisovans, who actually don't have a full name yet because scientists have decided they don't have enough information to give them a name, even though they have like significant enough to like say that they're a separate people. They have several teeth, they have several finger bones, whatever, but not like they don't have a full skeleton, so they have decided that they're not going to give
Anthropology's wild.
Give a full name. So right now they're just known as the Denisovans. Denisovans were cats are meowing again. The Denisovans are an extinct close relative of Homo sapiens. I was actually really surprised looking at the photo of how much they look like humans, because a lot of these species that are like close relatives of Homo sapiens don't look quite as much like humans as these did. And there's actually a good bit of evidence that they interbred quite a lot with Neanderthals and Homo sapiens.
There's a lot of like recent scholarship on that that's really interesting.
It's very interesting. So in this cave, they found a 50,000-year-old needle made from the bone of some unidentified large bird. And it is virtually identical to the sewing needles that we still use today.
I mean, to be fair, that's one of those things like bowls. Like, there's only so many different ways you can do this.
Yes, and the earliest one we found looks basically identical. There are ones that are more recent that look slightly different, that like have, some of them have like a notch like that where you could stick the sinew through it.
Mm-hmm.
The oldest one is virtually identical is really wild, 50,000 years old. So it's almost identical, except it was made from bone instead of metal. And obviously not quite as small as we can manufacture them today. But there's still the point at one end and the eye at the other end for the thread, or at the time it would have been sinew, to go through. There's another possible needle or pin that was found in 2008 in Sibudu Cave in South Africa that dates approximately 61,000 years back. But there's debate about whether or not it's actually a needle, or if it's a pin, or if it's just a part of something else that they found. It's unclear. This is the most positively identified one, and it wasn't by humans, which is by Homo sapiens. So it's by humans.
And it makes sense, if you're in Siberia, you probably want clothing. It's
yes.
cold.
Yeah, for sure. So for all this time, it's remained virtually unchanged until just before the Industrial Revolution. Now, once again, as I said earlier, though, when you are sewing by hand, the needle goes through the fabric and then turns around and comes out. It turns 180 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So for a long time, people were trying to figure out, how do we turn this needle 180 degrees? And it just wasn't working. So in 1755, someone named Charles Wiesenthal, a German mechanic living in London, funded by the British monarchy, was issued a patent for a double-pointed needle, with the patent labeled "needle that is designed for a machine." So the 2 points, it was basically the same as hand sewing needles, with the point at one end and the eye at the other, except there's also a point at this end. So that moves,
Okay.
That does something really important, which is it moves the eye right up against the point. And that is something that we still use today. In sewing machines, if you see a sewing machine needle, it has the point. I can't hand motion this. There's the point right next to the eye.
Pictures will be there.
Pictures will be there. And this led to 1790, Thomas Saint, an English cabinet maker, invented and patented a chain stitch sewing machine, the same chain stitch just as Timonier did. He invented and patented a chain stitch sewing machine meant for sewing short lengths of leather for shoemaking and other leather goods. It could also work on canvas and could be used for sewing ship sails. This is all according to the patent. It had many features that we would recognize on a modern sewing stitch, or a modern lock stitch sewing machine today, which is the overhanging arm. Again, we'll put pictures. An overhanging arm, a feed mechanism. Feed meaning it feeds the fabric through the thing, so like it helps
pulls it.
It
or
helps
whatever.
pull the fabric
Yeah.
through the sewing machine. A vertical needle bar and a looper, what they called a looper, which if you know modern sewing machines, the shuttle hook, the shuttle is the part that the bobbin goes into, which is the bottom thread, and the shuttle hook grabs that thread and like sort of makes a loop, grabs the top thread and makes a loop so that they can intertwine. Now, there wasn't a bottom thread in this. It was a single thread. However, we have no evidence that Thomas Saint ever built a prototype of this machine.
That's really common.
So and certainly never commercialized it. So it was basically all this patent, and the patent got lost. So Thomas Saint,
really?
Yeah. So
okay, things get lost all the time, but I just feel like the British.
No,
by
actually,
then.
no.
Okay.
The British by then were real bad about patents. Losing patents, I should say.
They were a little distracted with that, like, American Revolution thing.
So I have to...
I know they weren't actually. I don't need anything else.
I have to talk for just a second about how the British Patent Office worked. So instead of, like, today, when you apply for, like, one patent at a time, back in 1790 in England... They wanted you to, like, if you're an inventor, you would make one application for, like, everything that you invent. So Thomas Saint did what the British Patent Office wanted you to do and make one application for a whole bunch of things, which means that when he arrived at the Patent Office on July 17th of 1790, to issue patent number 1764, if anyone wants to look it up, it covered, amongst other things, this was not a complete list, paints, that with an S at the end, multiple, paints, glues, clog making, and a sewing machine. So this saved time for patent clerks, but the sewing machine patent was filed under glue. Specifically, glue, book binding for the use of.
I mean, to be fair, these are all, like, things that connect other things, except clogs.
Yeah, no, he was real into things that connect other things, it seems. And I guess he just wanted some sensible work shoes. Anyway, so that's where it stayed for 100 years. Until William Newton Wilson who's a sewing machine manufacturer whose hobby was researching sewing machines, and he was writing a book about the history of sewing machines, and he was doing a lot of digging through the British Patent Office.
Somehow ended up in the glue section.
And somehow, I think, if I recall correctly, I didn't write this part down, but if I recall correctly, he had, like, come across some cross-reference to it somewhere and asked them, does this exist? And they're like, no. And he's like, well, can I go look for myself? And they're like, well, I guess.
He goes into, like, stacks of boxes. Anyone who's been in an archive.
Searching in the attic and found, sure enough, this, Elias Howe, by the way, was the American who has laid claim to inventing the lock stitch machine. There have been a lot of people who sort of stole his patent. He very successfully went from extremely poor to wildly rich. Like multi-millions in 1800s money. By just suing the shit out of absolutely everyone who made a lock stitch sewing machine, including Singer. But he had laid claim to being the first person to invent. He was really the first person to patent, but he claimed it was the first person to invent a lock stitch sewing machine. Walter Hunt was actually the person who first invented it, but he got talked out of patenting it by his wife and daughter, who were like, this is going to put a lot of people out of work. And he's like, And then he set it in the attic for, like, forever.
Honestly, that's some solidarity right there.
There's more drama on that front that we can link. I can link some resources to where you can find out more of the drama of that. But in any case, I just want to pull this one piece of drama out, which is that at the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, actually in Fairmount Park,
in what is now the Please Touch Museum,
amongst
other places.
Elias Howe Well, he'd been going from like World Fair to World Fair.
Well, yeah,
As you do.
like you do when you're
As
an
you
inventor
do.
in those days.
Showing off his sewing machine. And at this 1876 Centennial Exhibition, he had his gigantic display with the words were Elias Howe, inventor of the sewing machine 1846. And on a smaller stand directly next to it, immediately next to it, Newton Wilson put up his own little display that with a replica that he had built of Thomas Saint's machine, which granted he did have to do quite a bit of remodeling of the looper in order to get it to actually work. So it didn't actually work the way that Thomas Saint did.
So that's the one that's
But-
like the first one that was under glue, right? That's
Yeah.
the glue machine.
Mhm.
Okay.
So it didn't actually work the way that it had been, but like he
He fussed with it.
he fussed with it and fixed up the looper until it worked. And so directly next to Howe's exhibit that said Elias Howe, inventor of the sewing machine 1846, on a smaller stand was just one machine next to his, giant display of machines, with the replica that Newton Wilson made of Thomas Saint's machine, and it had the words Thomas Saint, inventor of the sewing machine, 1790.
I respect that so much.
There was one thing that was really, really, really big about Thomas Saint's machine. That was extremely important. That unfortunately didn't get discovered for a long, long time. However, it brought up the idea, and other people didn't know about this idea, even though they didn't find his machine for 100 years. But it brought up the idea that the needle doesn't necessarily have to pass all the way through the fabric.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways that it can go in, and then like something else happens on the underside, and we can form a stitch without the needle going all the way through and then passing back up. Because there are some people who were literally trying to invent a sewing machine by like using that double-ended needle,
Mm-hmm.
taking like pincers that would pinch it all the way through and then grab it and then push it back up, and then which is just, you can't do that with a continuous length of thread very easily. It was just, there were a lot of issues with it. There was reason it never really took off. There are some other failures in this time. There's 1810, Balthasar Krems.
What a name.
Yeah, I think he was German. I might have that wrong. I don't know. He invented an automatic machine for sewing nightcaps. Like, he made nightcaps.
Aw.
And he didn't patent this design, but it didn't really work anyway. But it was meant to, like, it didn't really work for anything that wasn't circular also. So like the nightcap had to like go all the way around in a circle around this little thing. It didn't really work. 1814, there's an Austrian tailor named Joseph Mattersberger, who was issued a patent. I guess he was from Vienna, and he received a patent for a straight stitch sewing machine, which it doesn't say by straight stitch if that means lock stitch or what. Some sort of straight stitch, could be chain stitch, I don't know. He patented it, but he was a perfectionist, and he just kept he wasn't ever satisfied with the reliability of the machine, and it never really got quite to a stage where it should have been commercialized anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so it never went anywhere because he wouldn't even let it, even if someone wanted to commercialize it, I don't think he would have let them, because he just wanted to keep remaking until he was satisfied, which just never happened. He spent all his time and money trying to develop a better product and then died in extreme poverty, which happened to a lot of people who made sewing machines. 1818, someone named John Adams Doge,
Like
Doge,
Dogecoin?
yeah, Doge, and John Knowles invented America's first sewing machine, but it could only sew a few bits of fabric and then it would break. So it wasn't great. So then Timonier comes into the game. So after working as a tailor for a few years, Timonier spent 4 years from 1825 to 1829 working on inventing a sewing machine. This comes from, by the way, I have several sources that we'll put in. A lot of my sources come from this biography that I found of him from, let me scroll down, from 1867. It is a biography of Timonier in French, and there are only a few pages of it that are scanned online, but we will link to those. They do have some great information. Timonier comes into the game, spends from 1825 to 1829 working on inventing a sewing machine, and people were still trying to emulate hand stitches, not just hand stitching, but like hand stitches. So like stitches that you can form by hand, which lock stitch was not a stitch up until sewing machines became a thing. So the chain stitch was.
Okay.
So in Amplipuy, where Timonier grew up, there was a strong garment industry. Many of the people there were weavers, many were tailors, and many others practiced a form of embroidery called point de chaînette. I'm sure I'm butchering that. It's tambour embroidery. Anyone who knows what tambour embroidery is, that's what it is. And we will also put some pictures in. And
you'll send me some pictures. I have absolutely no idea what that means.
I will put some pictures. But what it is, basically, it uses a tambour needle is a needle with a little hook on the end, like a very, very teeny tiny crochet hook.
Okay.
And you put the needle in this little holder where you can change the needle out, and you work from the top, and you put the needle through the fabric. You wrap the thread, when you're doing it by hand, you wrap the thread around so it catches into that little hook, and then you pull it back up the top and take it forward 1 stitch, stick it back in, repeat the process. And it forms a stitch that looks like a chain on the top of the fabric. So this is what Timonier emulated with his thing, with his sewing machine. The back side of the chain stitch looks like a straight stitch, the type of stitching that everyone today is familiar with. If you look at your clothes, it's just a whole bunch in a row, a whole bunch of little stitches in a row. That's what the back of a chain stitch looks like. So Timonier took inspiration from this form of embroidery and endeavored to create a machine that could serve a dual purpose, to be used for both joining fabric for practical sewing purposes and for decorative embroidery. He succeeded and created a machine that used the tambour needle to create the chain stitch mechanically at a rate 6 times faster than even fast hand stitchers could. So I found in that biography, actually, it said that hand stitchers who are like tailors, people who are professionals at this, who are working fast, can make about 25 to 30 stitches a minute. So 6 times that, it didn't say exactly, but 6 times that is somewhere from 150 to 180 stitches a minute. It was made of wood, and you would put the needle in motion directly by a cord attached to a foot pedal, which was basically like, it was a treadle, but when you think of treadle sewing machines, it's the ones from the late 1800s, early 1900s that have this little metal plate at the bottom that you rock back and forth with your foot, and it attaches to sort of
like a wheel
like
at the top.
It attaches up to the sewing machine and makes the needle go up and down. It was basically that, except made with like wood and a cord. It was a plank and a cord. And it could only make 1 stitch with each pedal, which is this has gotta hurt your foot. But that was massive.
Yeah.
And so when he's working on this invention, he's very, very poor. He's spending so much time tinkering and inventing that he loses a lot of work and credibility as a result, because he's not really doing as much tailoring as he could.
Well, he's kind of like chasing windmills and stuff.
Yeah, and he's also grieving his wife.
Yeah.
So like I think that's the piece of perspective in here that like, okay, this makes sense. This is how you deal with grief before therapy.
You invent a sewing machine.
Yep. So in 1830, he signs a contract with someone named Auguste Ferrand, who is a mining engineer. Mining like hi ho, I'm going in the mines. Yeah.
Like going in the mountain.
Yeah. He's a mining engineer, and he's assistant professor at, I'm going to butcher this one, L'École de Mines, something, de Saint-Étienne, which is the engineering school of miners. Literally means like school of mines or school of miners of Saint-Étienne. Ferrand drew the technical drawings of the machine and submitted the patent application. The patent for his machine was issued to both of them in the names of both of the men on July 17th, 1830, and it was supported by the French government. Timonier was able to get Louis-Antoine Bonnier, who is the inspector of the Loire mines in Saint-Étienne. He was also an engineer at the Saint-Étienne Miners' School, to become an early investor in the sewing machine. Bonnier led Timonier to Paris and helped him secure a contract with the French government to use his sewing machine to make uniforms for the French army. That same year, Timonier, along with Auguste Ferrand, opened in Paris the first machine-based clothing manufacturing company in the world.
That's so cool. Especially because, like, when you think about the Industrial Revolution, you don't think France. And there's a lot of reasons for that we don't have time to go into. But
mainly because they kept just, like...
They were distracted.
They kept destroying everything that everyone made, too.
Yeah, they kept building barricades and singing. And I guess we had this too with the lighthouse, with the Fresnel lens. There it is.
Mm-hmm.
Where it was this French invention. And we just don't, like, we tend to associate these sort of like mechanical advances with the United Kingdom, with Germany, lesser extent to the United States, because the United States basically just stole everything from the United Kingdom.
Well, just as with the Fresnel lens, everyone outside of France was like, we don't want to do that. We're going to keep doing our own thing, thanks. And then
we're just going to do it a worse way because we don't want to do something a French person invented.
Well,
somebody was rude to me once in Paris, and now I'm mad.
So Timonier, along with Auguste Ferrand, in 1930, opened the first machine-based clothing manufacturing company in the world. He called the company, again, another French one, Maison Germaine Petit et C. Et is how you say and in French, right? It's just an ampersand in the thing. So it's et. Et C. And he built a workshop with 80 of his sewing machines in the Rue de Sèvres in Paris. His sewing machine was the first in the world, as far as I can tell, to be manufactured in any semblance of mass manufacturing. Even though there are only 80 of them, they're all housed in one workshop, and they were not being sold for home use. It was still the first sewing machine in the world to be mass manufactured.
And also, it's doing mass manufacturing. Like, it's making...
Well, for a time.
But it's making the uniforms or whatever.
Yeah, so this is like towards the end of 1830. I didn't get an exact date, but the patent was issued on July 17th, and then he moved to Paris and set up a company and made 80 of these machines and then started. So it's got to be somewhere near the end of 1830. And France loves its revolutions.
Yeah, it does.
So then the Revolution of 1830 happened. Also called the July Days. It was brought about by another change in regime in France, and there was a lot of political unrest at the time. So there's a lot of political unrest when Timonier opened his workshop. The Industrial Revolution, is in full swing at this point in time, and it was not uncommon for riots to break out because people's fear of machines replacing them.
Luddites!
Sound familiar? sound familiar?
Luddites get such a bad name. They weren't anti-technology. They were anti being treated as disposable. Like, they wanted worker protections.
Yeah, and also...
And they weren't the only ones, but they're just the famous ones. Because
Also,
they wouldn't, like, set fire to things. Like, they did a good job.
Yeah, these were not Luddites. These were...
Well, yeah, of course, it's a different country.
They were real happy to set fire to things. Like, a lot of things. But I just wanted to sort of bring in here, when I say sound familiar, I'm referring to even now, there's a lot going on with people scared AI will replace them for a good reason. There was slightly less good reason when you're talking sewing machines because they still need people to like power them and use them, and really to power them at that point, there was no electric sewing machine.
It's actually, so I'm looking this up because I don't know this for sure, but I also think this is the era that we got this term sabotage from, because I think the French workers were throwing their shoes, which are called sabots, into the machinery.
Yeah, well, that didn't happen here, but in this context, enter a whole bunch of unhappy French tailors.
I mean, legit.
The French tailors were big mad with Timonier. I say big mad because I just think it's funny. We say that to our cats all the time. We're like, oh, you're big mad, huh?
Like, you're big mad because you have no workers' rights.
Yeah. Well, big mad.
Labor John's gonna, like, divorce us.
So they were big mad with Timonier for inventing a sewing machine that they were worried would replace them. I mean, it could sew 6 times faster than they could. So they did have reason to be worried. Never mind the fact that sewing machines still had to be powered by people, literally, like, with your feet, called people-powered sewing machines. Even though sewing machines had to be both used and powered by people, and even today, electric sewing machines still have to be used by people, hence lots of really horrible horrible working conditions in lots of countries. But the tailors were still scared they would be put out of business by Timonier's machines. So on January 20th, 1831, so he had not been in business for very long, a few months at most. January 20th, 1831, a mob of somewhere between 150 to 200 angry tailors.
But you know what we know for sure? We may not know the numbers for sure, but we know for sure. Best dress mob.
Probably. They broke down the door of the workshop. Apparently, it took them about an hour to break down the door of the workshop. So Timonier had some warning to be able to go run over and try to save his machines. But they vastly outnumbered him. So they smashed all of his machines into a lot of pieces. Remember, they're made of wood, so they were easy to smash. And they piled them all up and lit them all on fire. And as the machines were, made almost entirely up of wood, they just went up in a big blaze. And Timonier barely escaped with his life, running out of the workshop carrying the only one of his 80 machines that he was able to save. And I just have this, we'll put a picture in, but these are massive machines. And they're made of wood and metal, so they're heavy.
I was gonna say, I know how heavy the ones are that are in our home.
So
I'm not running anywhere with one of those.
Yeah, I think the lightest sewing machine that I have, and granted, I have only ones that are all metal, but the lightest one that I have is still like 40 pounds.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
And granted, those were cast metal, so. But that's just the machine, not the stand. So his was not separable from the stand. It was all It was all just one thing. I would guess it's probably around that same,
Because I'm sure he wasn't using 50. Like balsa wood. Like he was probably using good wood.
Yeah, no, he was using good wood. So I just have this image of him just sort of like running out, holding it like a baby, just sort of waddling like a penguin because it's so heavy. And yeah.
Poor dude.
So he was only able to save that one machine. So from here, things get a little hazy. Also, by the way, about 75 of those angry tailors were caught and prosecuted and whatnot, but they didn't get very long sentences, but they did get sentences. But from here, things get a little hazy. There's less information about Timonier.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it that I found was poorly translated from French, so I am sorry if you see a source that says something different. I don't speak French, so I'm relying on Google Translate. But also a few things like some source would say one date, some source would say another day, some source would say one place name, some would say another place name. So I went with I looked at so many sources and just took what was the most common. So Timonier knew the tailors would come after him next, so he grabbed his family. He grabs his sewing machine, he grabs a few of their possessions, and they fled back to Saint-Étienne. A few months later, the death of Bonnier, who is the company's primary investor, if you remember, the death of him led to the complete dissolution of Timonier's already kind of dissolved company. In 1832, Timonier moved his family back to Amplipuy, where he had grown up, where his family still was. In 1834, he returned to Paris, potentially alone, ? And there, Timonier worked on contract as a tailor with his sewing machine. And then in 1836, he ran out of resources and returned to Amplipuy, this time on foot. I guess he couldn't afford to pay
for like a horse or whatever.
Yeah, or passage on a boat or what. I don't really know where Amplipuy is. If I think it's near mountains, so I don't know how you get.
He walked at any rate,
but he didn't walk the first time, so I don't know. He this time went on foot. He strapped his sewing machine to his back like a baby, and he used his sewing machine basically like a sideshow act to raise money for food and shelter and to continue traveling back home. He just sort of exhibited it. Mm-hmm. You could come watch him for money. He wasn't, I don't think, staying anywhere long enough to actually make people clothes. So he was just showing off his machine. During this time, Timonier, throughout this whole time, from the time he made his first machine, he continued to refine his machine, and he obtained new patents in 1841, 1845, and 1847 for new models of a sewing machine. The 1845 patent, which calls the machine a chain fasten machine, that's the French translation, obviously, notes that this new machine was able to produce 200 stitches per minute. So he had greatly improved it. And at that point, Timonier joined forces with I don't know how to say this name, Magnin, Magnin, M-A-G-N-I-N. I'm going to say Magnin, and I know that's butchering it, but I don't know how to say it otherwise. He joined forces with what the biography said was M.A. Magnin, but no other sources said the M.A., and that is important because there's another Magnin that comes in about 2 seconds. So I don't know if M.A. was a typo, because I know this other Magnin was definitely there. Mm-hmm. He joined forces with M.A. Magnin from Villefranche in the Rhône department, and their new company established its headquarters in Villefranche and manufactured machines to sell at a price of 50 francs each. This is in 1845. When the 1847 model of the machine was patented, it was co-licensed by an attorney named Jean-Marie Magnin. Magnan, whatever. So I don't know if they're relatives, if they're the same person, and the biography just put two different names, one sentence apart from each other. I don't know. But they called the machine at that point in time, from the 1847 patent, they called it a couteau brodeur. Brodeur means embroiderer. Couteau, I wasn't able to find anything, so I think it might be a made-up word. like just some name,
like a cute,
like a brand name or something. I don't know, because internet turned up blank. But I did find a really nifty what's the word for poster? I found a really nifty poster, selling for like $7 on eBay, so I might get it. So this 1847 machine was able to produce 300 stitches per minute. So
we're really cruising now.
He'd really been cruising. On February 9th, 1848, so a few months later, the company took out an English patent for its machine, and that they built from then on in metal. So it is now looking more and more like a modern sewing machine. But then the Revolution of February 1848 happened. So literally a few days after they filed this patent. The Revolution of February 1848 once again stopped Timonier's sewing machine production, and he goes to England, where the patent is transferred to a Manchester company that the biography doesn't tell the name of which company it is. Some company in Manchester gets his patent. He only stayed there for a few months and returned to France in 1849. In 1851, Timonier sent his sewing machine to the Universal Exhibition in London, but it unfortunately did not arrive at the exhibition until after the jury's examination.
Oh, bummer.
So Elias Howe, again, the American who patented the two-thread lock-stitch sewing machine, won before the jury even set eyes on Timonier's sewing machine, which is really sad. Like, it's unclear what happened, but the courier just like didn't get there fast enough.
It's a bummer.
So in 1855, he takes it to the World Fair in Paris, and the exhibition's board of commissioners awarded Timonier's Couteau Brodeur a first place medal.
Yeah, he got at least one medal.
So he got something, but despite this, Timonier's sewing machine sold very poorly throughout his entire career. Like, he was really, the reason he was partnered with so many different people is because he was not making enough money to fund his own machine. So despite his original success in obtaining this very short-lived contract with the French government, he just didn't make money, and he died in poverty in Amplipuy on August 5th, which is our wedding anniversary. But he died on August 5th, 1857, at the age of 64.
I would say he's not that old.
Not old. I don't know how he died. Nothing said, but he died at the age of 64 in 1857. And again, that one source said he left behind a widow and several children, but I don't know when he remarried or if he had more children or if those were just the three originals. There's a museum in Amplipuy that is dedicated to Timonier and to the history of the sewing machine. And strangely also to the history of bicycles. And one on the there's a what's that website where you can like see travel things? I don't know.
What? It's Google Maps.
No, it's a website that like tells you. I don't know. I'll find it. Okay. Some website that like tells you where places are. It's like Yelp, but one of the other ones.
Okay.
And there's reviews, and one of the reviews said something to the effect of, "Oh, and if you go here, you'll understand the link between sewing machines and bicycles, and it's very fascinating." And then I couldn't find anything online that told me what the link between sewing machines and bicycles was, so I guess we got to go to Amplipuy. Anyway, this museum is called Musée Barthélemy Timonier, and other than this museum, very few people seem to even know he existed. Which is quite sad and unfortunate.
But now you do.
But now you know.
I think, is that sort of the end of the narrative?
That's the end of the narrative.
So what I'm a little surprised this was my takeaway, because going into this, I was thinking about all the various sort of conflicts there are about inventing things. So like there's this German guy who everyone in Europe says invented the airplane. And then we in the United States say the Wright brothers invented the airplane. And, you know, it's so there's a lot of these things around. But what I'm more struck by is the sort of labor rights angle. So this is, it's weird for us to think of now because we just take for granted the sewing machines exist.
Yeah.
But we're kind of, like you said, we're kind of going through this now with like AI, where the technology is ahead of the laws about it.
Yeah.
And like all of these various people, like these tailors who had the mob or the Luddites or the Sabot people or whatever, they had a real concern.
Yeah.
And they didn't have, especially in France, but really anywhere, a good mechanism to protect their rights as workers, which is, of course, where we get unions eventually, but not at this point. And this is always my question, is like, as somebody who really likes technological advancements and so forth, and who's also, I mean, like, worried about AI, right? Like,
yeah,
this is the first time in my life that like my particular skills are starting to be encroached upon.
Yes.
And I realize that's a privilege that I've had, but it's a privilege I've had, and now AI is here, and people are advertising like AI music teachers and like AI podcasters.
I mean, it's been a concern slightly longer
for the artists,
for me, but like what I didn't anticipate were the very, like, I anticipated, you know, photography. That
was like the first thing that came.
I went to school. I went to college for, I did a psychology and fine arts double major, but I focused in fine arts on printmaking and photography. And the photography I knew, like, from when I was in college, you know, got 13 years ago at this point. I knew from then, like, this is a concern. But what I did not anticipate were the more physical things. Like, I wasn't into embroidery when I was in college, but that has really taken over the last, like, several years of my life. I didn't anticipate that. I didn't anticipate printmaking becoming something that I'd have to worry about. And the issue isn't that AI can make a piece of embroidery, although machine embroidery has been there for a long time. But if you know what you're looking at, you can pretty easily differentiate machine and hand embroidery. What I did not anticipate was AI making images that are being sold as like prints of embroidery and stuff that look to the untrained eye real.
Yeah.
And there are several that I, as someone who has gone real deep into the embroidery rabbit hole, I have had to stare at them for several minutes to figure out, okay, this one small section is how I know it's not real. And the only way that I know is because this particular stitch does not look like this in this particular ways. Like, you would not be able to run a satin stitch over that long of an expanse without it just like gaping or things like that. And people who aren't trained in these things don't know. And it's happening with all sorts of different
and the thing is
things
that I'm thinking about is, how do we as a society allow for these scientific advancements to happen? Because the advancements are always going to be ahead of the laws. That's just the nature.
Yeah.
You can't make laws about things that don't exist.
Yeah.
How do we balance that? And I know that there's theoretically conversations happening in various governments, and as we're filming this, the G7 is going on and AI is on the docket. But like, I don't know, it's like, who's at the G7? President Biden, who's been around the block a few times. the Pope, like, these are not the people who are going to figure out how to fix what's going on with AI.
And the problem is that the lawmakers aren't necessarily, I mean, there's always exceptions to the rule, but
always.
But they aren't usually the same people who are like really knowledgeable about these things, because about like technology things, because a lot of times they are people who have studied law, and they might have studied law about technology, but they are not the people doing the computer programming.
Right. And like in
most
theory,
of the time.
we have these committees that then experts can come in and speak to, but everything is so dysfunctional right now that like these committee meetings are not happening.
And
Or I mean, like, I'll never forget this. And people who are our age will remember the internet is a series of tubes. Comment. I said that's like a Gen Z person, and they looked at me like I had 15 heads. But this is an old problem.
Yeah.
And I don't know the solution of it is, but I think what is important is that we just don't fall into Frankenstein, right? Like, we need to, since Frankenstein wasn't about the monster, it was about the sort of technology getting ahead of itself, getting ahead of morality, getting ahead of, I think we need to make sure.
Also, Frankenstein wasn't the name of the monster.
I didn't call the monster Frankenstein. It's not about the monster. I called him the monster because I know Frankenstein's the name of the scientist.
I'm not saying that about you. I'm saying that to the point of, we think of many people think of Frankenstein as the name of the monster. They think of it as something it is completely not in so many different ways.
Okay, that's fair. So usually it's like, I think of this as like, it's the name, the monster's not named Frankenstein. It's like
no,
this pedantic thing.
It to be pedantic.
But I hear what you're saying is like, the monster, I mean, this is the whole point of the book, right? Like, if you've read Frankenstein, it's like, who's really the monster here? And spoiler alert, it's not the monster, it's the scientist. And that's, I think, what we are constantly dealing with. And
also another point of why I bring that up is like, that is part of what the thing that we're part of, one of the many things that we are trying to avoid with this discussion around AI and the laws around AI and stuff is we don't want it, like, on the surface for people to be thinking, oh, it's about people being scared of technology advancing, when that's not what the problem with AI is. The problem with AI is all of the ways it is all of the ways that it is, I mean, not just displacing people, but
altering our reality.
The ways that it is altering reality in some pretty scary ways, like on like global politics levels. I know one of your biggest pet peeves, and it is a pet peeve of mine too, but Fega gets real mad about this, is people not being able to tell that an image is made by AI. Like
obvious ones. Like some of them are hard. Some of them are hard. And the thing is, not to get, because we can go on for ages about AI images, because there's a lot to be said on it. But I think the important piece is like those, like you were talking about, those early sewing machines that didn't really work very well.
Yeah.
That's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
With AI. And if
except we're not, and we're in that intermediary phase.
Sure. But like, if when these intermediary sewing machines came up, if there had been some concern about other human beings, which is asking a lot of people in the 18th and 19th century, I know.
Walter Hunt did it.
But if they had said, okay, this technology is on the horizon, let's figure out ways to make sure people are going to be able to like feed their families, then the fact that now we have clothing that if you don't know what to look for, you can't necessarily tell. Like, I don't think people know how to tell if something's been hand stitched or not. Obviously there's things that are really obviously machine stitched, but like it
and
is
really obviously hand stitched.
right. But there's things that
But
are
there's
not.
a lot
That's not
people
clear.
people who don't
Like I
know
couldn't tell
that sort of thing.
Like I can't tell. I mean, if you put some like really close ones in front of me, I wouldn't be able to tell. And that's what they were scared of, right? Like that's what those tailors were scared of. And that's what happens. And now we don't have armies of traveling tailors and stuff because we don't need those many people making clothing.
No, now you have like 1,000 people crammed into a factory on the other side of the world
who are not trained to the same level because they don't need to be. I mean, we had this with Industrial Revolution. This was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. I mean, there's a million examples of this. And I think, looking at history, it's like, why do we even do any of this? Like, obviously we just find it interesting, but like, why do we care about history? And at the end of the day, it's like, we need to learn from what came before and what happened. Those tailors, those Luddites, all those people, they were right. That's what happened.
Yeah. Now you end up with
and so we have an opportunity now with this really cool new technology. Like AI is so cool.
There's so much
like
it can do that would be absolutely incredible and life-changing.
I mean,
in good ways, and it can also be absolutely life-changing in horrible ways.
Yeah, and we have an opportunity to figure out what the answer is, and I just hope we do that. I don't have a lot of faith, but
I mean, I think
call your congressman or whatever.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is keeping it up with the law fast enough that things can't get too out of control.
And we need people who understand the technology, who care. This can be done. We haven't done it in the past, but that doesn't mean that we are doomed to repeat it. I wish I had some answers to what the answer is, but I am a tour guide and public historian, and I honestly, besides being able to tell obvious AI, I don't really know that much about AI. So I would I would encourage you to learn what you can. Definitely learn how to tell AI images from non-AI images, because especially as we get into this election cycle, it's going to get worse. A lot of these...
some good videos.
There's a lot of guides out there, and we'll link some. Because right now we've got a lot of like Facebook pages that are posting like, an AI image of like Jesus hugging a baby or something. And they're using those to sort of find the people who will fall for AI. And I guarantee you a lot of those are going to turn political.
They already are.
Soon, if they haven't yet.
And many that are.
Yeah. And this is how, I saw these images that were used as an example, but they were excellent, that were of Trump and Biden at a picnic. And the person had made them to make a point. And they picked the ones that were not obvious AI. Like, they didn't have 10 fingers on one hand, right? Like, this is, you had to really look closely to determine that they were not real. And that, I think that's, in the short term, the most important thing for people to educate themselves on. And also in the long term, learn about AI. Learn about how AI might impact your industry that you know about. And if the conversation isn't happening in your sort of professional field,
bring it up.
Yeah, like bring that up. This is gonna be, I predict this is gonna be the next sort of industrial revolution, quote unquote. We sort of had the sort of knowledge and information revolution with the internet, and this is the next thing. And it's coming whether we want it or not. So we need to figure it out so we don't have to be throwing sabots at each other.
That's the hope.
Yeah. So thank you for hanging out with us here on Delicious of History for this long episode, but I think it was worth it. So
believe me, this was the short version.
I believe you. I've been there with similar topics. So you're just like, I'm cutting out I promise I cut out everything. This is all me.
I mean, you saw me keep saying, I'm almost done. I'm almost done. And then I was not almost
This morning,
done.
she was like, I need a half hour. And then I'll be ready to record. And it is currently 10:31.
Okay, but I was ready to record at 8:50.
Yeah, but like, my point still stands. So
I took a break for lunch.
But at any rate, we love you. You're awesome. Big thank you to everyone who's watching or listening. If you're on YouTube, thanks for hanging out this long. YouTube loves watch time. Give us a little like, give us a subscribe.
And watch out for our Substack post that'll have all of these links that I'm talking about.
And we'll also have the links in the show notes.
Yeah, in the show notes.
If you're listening to us on a podcast, drop us a review. Whoever you are, feel free to head over to our website, www.deliciousoфhistory.com. And there you can find links to all of our social media pages, our Substack. And finally, I have put up a tours page. So if you are in the Philadelphia area, it has how you can contact me to get the most irreverent tour in the city of Philadelphia. I actually don't know if that's true, but I think I'm up there. I'm definitely in the top 10 or 20 of irreverent tour guides in Philadelphia. And it's that season. So give me a buzz. And thank you to our patrons.
Yes.
And Substack people who are paying to look at our Substack.
Yes.
And yeah, so we're a mess because it's 10:30 at night and usually we're asleep by now. So goodbye. We love you.
We'll see you next week. Next
Monday. And enjoy this episode relevant audio drop.
We just heard the good news. Mazel tov.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's a nice thing.
Yes, it is.
Very nice.
Thank you.
What is it?
It's a sewing machine.
It's a sewing machine.
Can work twice as fast. Made by machine. No more handmade clothes.